Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House in New York and to this book talk, My Friend Natalia, with author Laura Linstedt and the translator David Hackston. The book was published in the US on March 23rd by Liveright. Please visit scandinaviahouse.org to see everything that we have on to offer, including virtual film screenings, virtual exhibitions, children's workshops, among many other things. Please do feel free to ask questions for Laura and David in the chat box. There'll be time at the end to ask them. The talk will be recorded and made available on our website, as well as Scandinavia House's YouTube channel. Laura Linstedt became a critical literary sensation with her adoption-themed debut novel, Scissors, which has earned a nomination for the Finlandia Prize, the country's most prestigious literary honor. Lindstedt's second novel, One Iron, published in English by One World, earned her several literary prizes, including the coveted 2015 Finlandia Prize. Her latest novel, My Friend Natalia, has been a critical success and has been sold to 13 territories. David Hackston is a British translator of Finnish and Swedish literature and drama. He read Scandinavian studies at the University College London and now lives in Helsinki, where he works as a freelance translator. Notable recent publications include Kata Ketu's wartime epic, The Midwife, the 4 novels of the Helsinki Norm, books by Antti Toimanemi, and the latest, which Little Siberia won the 2020 Patrono Award for Best Scandinavian Crime Novel of the Year. In 2019, he translated Pachim Starchovic's Crossing, which was shortlisted for the National Book Award. And in 2020, he was awarded the Oxford Winfield Prize for Literary Translation. So please welcome Laura and David.
Hi, everybody. It's a shame we can't see everybody, but I assume you're all there. So hello from Helsinki. And thanks for the introduction. I wonder, Laura, would you like to introduce yourself as well and tell who are you
All right. Yes, I'm Laura Linstedt. I'm here now here in Helsinki, where I live and where I write. And I'm born in northern part of the Finland, in an area called Kainuu, but now feeling very at home here in the capital city. And I would like to correct one pronunciation. It's about my second novel. I don't know, does it say, but Oneiron, it's the name of my second novel. It's One Iron is a golf term. I learned it afterwards. I have written the book and learned that one iron is basically something that you use in golf. So Oneiron is the name of my second novel.
Are you a keen golfer?
No, not at all.
No.
Not at all. Well, maybe that's enough. We can continue with the day's theme.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, hello from me as well. I'm David Hackston, and I've been translating Finnish literature for around 20 years. Goodness, it's been a long time. But yeah, this was the first time that I worked with Laura, which was a really nice acquaintance. I mean, Laura's agent is the person who put us together in the first place. And of course, I knew who she was because she'd won the Finlandia Prize and everything. But yeah, it was a lovely opportunity to work with this book, and then all the better when it was snapped up by W.W. Norton in New York. So and then I ended up translating the whole thing, which was great, because sometimes when you translate only 50 pages of something for the agent, just so that they can market the book, and then it can be a bit unfulfilling sometimes, because you put a lot of, it has to be every bit as good as the whole novel, but you don't get to translate the whole novel unless somebody really goes for it. And so luckily with My Friend Natalia, then that was the case. So and so that's why we're here today, which is lovely. So speaking of Natalia, why don't we delve right into the book? I mean, I don't know. I mean, normally I'd sort of say a show of hands of how many people have read it, but of course I cannot see anyone. But we've both read it, so we will now read a section of it. And the Polish translator is listening. Hi, Sebastian.
Hi, Sebastian, nice that you are there.
Shout out to Poland. Right, but anyway, we're going to read we'll start off proceedings by reading a short section of the book. I wonder if it would be sensible would you like to introduce the book just in a few words before you read it? I think maybe also introduce what's happening in this passage. Yeah.
All right. I have chosen a little passage from which reminds a little bit like Vagina Monologues, written by Eve Ensler. But maybe some words about the novel itself, so that readers and listeners can have an idea what it is about. My friend Natalia tells a story of a woman codenamed Natalia, and she comes to see the therapist, and this is how she presents her problem for the first time. I read a very short passage. I think about sex all the time. That is my problem. And then she says later on, and I don't know what to do with my lovers who are absent when they are present and present when they are absent. And that's why I have come here. You are my last hope. Help me. So she suffers some kind of sexual obsessions, sexual thoughts that don't let her peace and calm. So that's why she came to therapist. And the therapist gives her exercises, writing exercises with keywords. And then she starts to produce stories. And these exercises and therapy sessions, 10 all together, they create the plot line of this novel. And the short passage we are going to read with David, me first in Finnish and then David in English, is where Natalia gives her vulva a voice. So that was the reference to Vagina Monologues. And here her vulva speaks. Nimeni on Belrev. Ranskaa osaavana tiedät, että nimessä on kaikki pielessä. Ja taiteen rakastajana ymmärrät, miksi näin on. I've outstayed my welcome, kuten sanonta kuuluu, joten minun on aika jatkaa matkaa. Lävitseni virtaa Mississippi, jota emäntäni kutsui lapsena pissisipiksi. Kiinnyin paikkaan heti, onhan suistoalue aika lailla muotoiseni, ja lempinimestäkin tykkäsin, olihan ensimmäinen tehtäväni valuttaa virtsaa. Tämä on mielestäni paras tapa tehdä matkasuunnitelma, nähdä uusi muoto annetun muodon päällä, Italiassa saapas, Kroatiassa siipisaurus, Suomessa neito, Argentiinassa liftaava majava, Kiinassa lentävä noita-akka, joessa häpy, saaressa sydän. Paikka on silloin muuttunut omaksi. Minun Mississippini rämemaat eivät ehdi mädäntyä, pilaantua, saati löyhkätä, sillä virtaus on niin kova. Minun Mississippini imee pyörteisiinsä minkä haluaa. Se on hilpeä Dixieland-ryhmä. Se on honky-tonk-baari, jossa on pakko huutaa. Älä kysy, onko se saluuna vai bordelli vai kasino vai jotain muuta. Se on aina jotain muuta. Se on Für Elisen ragtime-versio. Se on synkooppi, josta herrat lääkärit olivat muinoin yhtä huolissaan kuin junakyydin naisia turmelevasta vaikutuksesta. Se on Greyhound, jonka peltikylkiin siivet ovat kasvaneet kiinni. Se on American Airlines, jonka pyörät iskevät kiitoradasta kirosanoja. Se on kanootti, tietenkin se on kanootti. Se on vettä, lietettä, eksymistä, löytämistä. Se on juurensa ruskean veteen laskeva mangrovepuu. Emäntäni väittää, ettei hänellä ole sävelkorvaa. Se ei haittaa, sillä minun Mississippini melodiat ovat hyvin yksinkertaiset. Tarvitaan vain rummut, basso ja vihellys. Osaatko sinä viheltää, tohtori? New Orleansin pojat ainakin osaavat. Yksi paukuttaa läskipassollaan rytmin rummutuksen tueksi ja vislaa huultensa välistä sävelen, joka saa minun Mississippini liikkumaan. 2 miestä, 2 soitinta, 2 kädet, 1 huulet. Unelmieni orkesteri, joka soittaa pyynnöstäni toivebiisini, The Bobcats ja The One and Only, The Big Noise from Winnetka.
Thanks, Laura. So I'll read this same passage now in English. Now, just for a bit of context, so Laura, as she explained, this is it's kind of like the Vagina Monologues. So the speaker is the vagina, and then the mistress, remember the mistress is Natalia, just to bear in mind. Okay, here we go. My name is Belle Rêve. As one who speaks French, you'll notice that everything is wrong with this name. And as a lover of art, you'll understand why. I've outstayed my welcome, as the saying goes, so I'd better continue. Through me flows the great Mississippi, which as a child my mistress used to call the Pissy Missy. I became instantly attached to the place. After all, the river delta is shaped almost like me. And I like the nickname because, after all, my principal function is to pass urine. I think this is the best way to draw up a travel plan, to see a new form above another old one, to see Italy as a boot, for instance, Croatia as a pterosaur, Finland as a maiden, Argentina as a hitchhiking beaver, China as a flying witch, a river as a vulva, an island as a heart. In this way, a place becomes your own. The glades around my Mississippi don't have time to decompose or rot, let alone to stink, because the current is so strong. My Mississippi sucks into its vortex whatever it wants. It's a perky Dixieland band. It's a honky-tonk bar where you just have to shout. Don't ask whether it's a saloon or a brothel, a casino or something else. It's always something else. It's Für Elise in ragtime, with all those sassy, syncopated rhythms that big, important doctors used to be almost as worried about as they were about the debauching effects of train travel on young women. It's a Greyhound with wings grown fast to its tin sides. It's American Airlines, its landing gear pounding curses from the runway. It's a kayak. Of course it's a kayak. It is water, sludge, being lost, being found. It is a mangrove tree stretching its roots into the brown water. My mistress claims she doesn't have an ear for music. It doesn't matter one way or the other, because my Mississippi's melodies are very simple. All you need is a set of drums, a bass, and a whistle. Can you whistle, doctor? The boys in New Orleans sure can. There's a guy who slaps his fat bass in time with the drums while whistling a tune that really gets my Mississippi moving. 2 men, 2 instruments, 2 pairs of hands, 1 pair of lips, a dream orchestra playing my favorite tune at my behest, the Bobcats with the one and only Big Noise from Winnetka.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Sounded nice.
Yes, yes. I mean, we talked about this morning about which section to choose, and it's difficult, obviously, because each section has a context, and if you haven't read the book, then maybe the context is a bit lost. But but anyway, this gives a flavour of much of the book. Now, Laura, you said at the beginning that Natalia has come to this therapist to talk about her problems. Do you want to tell us more about that?
Yes, the therapist is the narrator of the novel, although there is a lot of different levels of narration. That means that some parts Natalia is allowed and talking all the time, so it's not obvious which one actually is the real narrator of the novel. But technically, the therapist who I do not give a name, no gender, leads the discussion and wants to find the real problem, what is haunting Natalia, because the therapist maybe doesn't think that the sexuality is her real problem. There is something beneath the sexual level. And here I turn upside down the normal psychoanalytical Freudian idea that whatever we do, our actings and talks, the true meanings lies in the sexual level, sexual impulses and sexual drives. Here the whole situation is a bit different. The sexual part is very visible in many ways in the novel, and it's totally explicit. But there might be something underneath the sexual level, and that is what the therapist tries to find out what it is, and they make interpretations and try to make Natalia reveal more and more.
And of course, the book's called My Friend Natalia, and she is well, one of the protagonists, but one could also think of the therapist, the narrator, as being another equal protagonist. I mean, there was a very nice review of this book in the New York Times, and the critics said that at the very end, that the deeper, indeed more layered mystery is it emerges the novel's chimerical narrator. What do you think about this suggestion that in fact the narrator, the therapist, is every bit as interesting as Natalia and her exploits?
Yes, for me the therapist is absolutely also the character of the novel, and I have to use the pronoun they, which is very clumsy because I can't say he or she. In Finland, we do have only one beautiful pronoun, hän, which is usable in both genres. So, but the therapist is a bit mystery to me even, and they react to Natalia, and they are obsessed with Natalia, absolutely. But when the therapist is doing a research and interpretations on what Natalia says, they start to reveal things from themselves. But it comes more implicitly than what Natalia does, because Natalia is out and loud all the time and very explicit in what she says.
Yes. I notice in the chat window there's a sort of ongoing questions, which is quite good. And actually one of them, well, yes, but one of them brings us sort of neatly on to the to the therapist. And of course, you already touched on this, that the therapist isn't, or rather the sex of the therapist is left a mystery. And of course, that's facilitated by the fact that Finnish is sort of, at least in this respect, kind of gender free. So so you can play with these things. Although, having said, I mean, it is a first person narrative, so in a way, it's not that difficult to do this in Finnish, and also in English as well, because it's written from the first person perspective of the narrator, and then actually it's a lot easier to keep the mystery about about whether it's he or she. I mean, I once translated a short story that was a third person narration, where it was also important that the protagonist wasn't gendered, and that's much harder because in English we're really stuck with these two words, and so I feel, I mean, increasingly people use they as a singular, but I think it draws too much attention to itself in a way, because the whole point actually of the Finnish is that you can read it and not even notice that the therapist is not gendered.
That's true.
Yeah.
I just saw a question from the chat box, which just opened up, and there was a question about the audiobook, because Penguin Random Audio House was the name, has produced an audiobook out of Natalia, and there was a question: is T.L. Thompson woman or a man? I saw there, and actually the process, I was very lucky to get involved in the process of choosing the reader for English Natalia. And I had many reading samples to hear. And then after hearing and listening, we choose to take T.L. Thompson. And to answer your question, they define them as a non-binary, but my therapist is not narrator is not non-binary. He or she is just not defined in the book. But the reading of T.L. Thompson is very good, I think. It's you just don't know where you have your own imagination there, and you can fill the voice with your own ideas. I think it works very well with this book.
Yes. And that really shows how the physical book and the audio book are they sort of end up living their own lives in a way.
Absolutely.
Because, yeah. And of course, it might be interesting, having spoken about the English audiobook, to tell people in the audience that in fact you read the Finnish audiobook yourself.
Yes, and that was my solution to the problem, because I think, of course, my voice is very feminine, but first of all, it's the authorial voice. So that gives that, I think that it solved the problem, but I can't do it with other languages, of course.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And I also think it's important with this book and in the audiobook, and I think it's quite successful, the audiobook, we were speaking about this earlier, that that it's done in a way that doesn't attract attention to, that doesn't underline this issue sort of too much, because it's not necessary to underline it, because the book is about many things, but it's not really about that. I mean, as I say in English, and it's interesting, Sebastian's in the audience and asks whether it was difficult to keep the therapist genderless. I mean, Natalia, my friend Natalia, has now been translated into 12 languages, I believe.
Not already, but it's in process.
They're in process, yeah, they're in process. And I looked at the list today, and actually it seems that none of them are languages where this is a problem. But then if it was ever translated into Polish, this would immediately become a problem, because even in the first person, verbs decline also for gender, so in the past tense. So
actually, the Lithuanian version,
yes, that's right.
Translation, Urtelien Ponte has told me that she has had big problems when translating the book, because there it affects the verbs also.
Yes.
And
yes, when you told me that.
Yes, so there are, but I have said that if it's a problem, you just have to use your imagination how to solve it.
Yeah, well, I'd be fascinated to know how she ends up doing that, and how anyone else working into a Slavic language ends up doing it. Quite interesting, yeah. And in fact, so we talk about translations into different languages, but also this novel plays with lots of different languages. So you play with a lot of French, and you talk a lot about etymology. What is it that particularly draws you to these things in literature in general?
Yes, I think that it might be even a method for me now that I look back to my work that I have already written. I used it a lot of in Oneiron, because there are 7 main characters from different parts of the world, and they do not have the same language. They don't have the same cultural background. And so I have put in Oneiron, for example, Brazilian Portuguese, French, of course, English, Hebrew. There is a letter written in Hebrew, although I do not know even one single letter in Hebrew. So, of course, that was translated for my request to the book. But in Oneron, the poetical function was to show that these people who are living in my book, these 7 women from all over the world, living in afterlife, which is the setup of the novel, that they are strange to each other and they are foreign to each other as they are for me. I don't. It's not really necessary to me to understand each languages. I can put some phrases into the novel.
So do you think in Oneron that because it takes place seconds after they've all died?
Yes.
So that in a way, after death, there is this sort of post-Babel or pre-Babel world where we sort of regress to all speaking the same language, or that they continue speaking their individual languages, but they suddenly have the ability to understand it all.
In the end of the novel, they do have that ability. That comes in some what is called telepathic ability they have, but just in the end of the novel. Before that, they have to face the strangeness and the very difficulties of understanding each other. But in My Friend Natalia, the therapist, the narrator, is Francophile, and they want to show the cultural background and the sophistication. So that's why they used a lot of French words in the novel. I think that the narrator thinks that French culture is the most beautiful and rich and cultivated possible culture in the world.
I think the therapist comes quite close to actually explicitly saying that at some point.
Yes, that's true. And there is some Latin words and Greek words and old etymologies from Scandinavian words, because the therapist is crazy of language. They want to really go deeper and deeper to meanings, because they feel that the truth might rise from there.
Yes.
So,
and of course, you know, because also you are interested in language, and the therapist is interested in language, and in playing with language and using puns and everything. I mean, this makes my life really difficult, and all your translators. But also it makes it fun. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's difficult, but it's fun, because life would be boring if everything was easy. So
can you tell me what was the hardest part for translating in My Friend Natalia?
Yeah, well, it's probably, I mean, I think there are individual sections that are difficult, and it's specifically because of wordplay. I mean, we actually touched on one of them in the bit that we read out, because you take this word Mississippi, and Natalia says that can such a word ever exist? Mississippi, it looks like such a strange word. And then, of course, in Finnish, you sort of go off on your on a tangent about the word Mississippi. But then the translator has to go off on a different tangent. So actually a lot of it is, well, not a lot, but there is, I think, one paragraph that I sort of rewrote rather than translated, because otherwise it would, I mean, otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to anyone, I think.
Otherwise you would need to use like footnotes, and that's not a very good idea.
Yeah, that's too much. I mean, I mean, it's the bit about where she takes the word into 2 sections, or firstly where she says in Finnish it's hang on, what is it? It's Mississippi.
Mississippi, yes.
Right. And so then there's this sort of explanation about these 2 words and what they could potentially mean in Finnish. So
should I say it?
If you want,
yes, because pissi is P, which is very easy to translate into English.
Sure, yes.
Pissi, very same. But sippi is not very common word in Finnish, but rather an dialect, and it's like being very tired. So there is a P and being tired put together in Finnish language.
Yeah. So because of these specific meanings in Finnish, then I was unable to use these examples. So then I, with my version, that Mississippi turned into pissy missy. And of course, okay, pissy is the same, but then there's this section, what does missy mean? She asks her mother. And then my mother told me being missy meant being churlish and bad-tempered, and that in Mississippi, no less, it was how people pronounced missy. So, I mean, that is basically recomposed. Because, and there are other examples as well. I mean, there's the section about Le Grand Pêcheur, where you play on French, which again, it plays on French and Finnish. So it's really difficult to translate it, you know, word for word. So the translator just has to be really creative, I think. Yeah. But you know, and everybody can be creative in their own way. I think it's very good that you encourage people to use their creativity, because
and yes, I actually wrote a letter for all the translators in the beginning of the process, just to point out that, okay, there will be difficulties in translation, but please use your imagination, because it can't be à la lettre.
No, definitely not. Yeah. Definitely not.
There are a huge amount of questions in the chat box.
There really are, actually. I mean, shall we quickly address some of them and then get back to
maybe.
So we have here, is earmouth a real painting?
Yes. No. It is an imaginary painting, which is described very detailed manner in the novel. But it's not, I don't know at least, but it's out of my imagination. And I was very strict about that when the Natalia is translated into other languages. I really don't want to have earmouth as a painting in the cover of the novel, because I feel it's very important that each reader imagines the painting in their visual eyes.
Yes. Yeah, good. So that's that one. And some of them we've already covered. The therapists, gender. We've talked about T.L. Thompson. Sebastian asks, this might be a bit of a translator insider question, but it's an interesting one. If it were translated into Polish or any other Slavic language, where the sex cannot be easily hidden, what would be your decision? Should you make the doctor a man or a woman or a person who uses feminine and masculine forms about themselves? Alternatively, perhaps. Alternately. You mean sort of one after the other? That might be very confusing for the reader.
If you would like to make very experimental translation out of it, maybe one phrase that it's female and other phrase male, and then change these like this. I don't know, that would be a place for a discuss.
I think that could be quite psychedelic for the reader.
Maybe too much. I don't know, but that is very hard question, and I would feel a lot of pain if I needed to decide.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Yeah, well, Sebastian assures us in the comments that such a thing has already been done. So that might be one option for a translator. I mean, of course, the thing is that every language is different. And every language, well, presents its own problems and also suggests its own solutions. So, right, Jen asks, to both of you, how much did you work together on the translation, and were there any disagreements you had to work through, and who won?
Okay. I think that our collaboration has been very good. We first, when we started to work, or you started to work with the translation, we met in the cafe. There wasn't all at that time wasn't the COVID problem, so we could see in the cafe, and you have had questions, and I tried to answer, and then you have always asked if you have some problem, and then I have read the first translation and maybe the second one also. So this is I can read French translation and English. So two books I've been able to take on me.
Yeah, I think it's been a good collaboration.
Yes.
I'm really happy. Yeah, I mean, and that in a way brings us back to the question of all your translations, because what does it feel like to read to receive your translation in a language that you can't read?
Normally, I have had some discussions with the translator because almost everyone sends me questions, and with Natalia, I did have this Slack channel where I introduced you as well,
yes.
and
yesterday or something,
and you came there yesterday.
I think the reason for this was that by the time you told me about the Slack channel, I basically finished translating the whole book.
Yes. Oh, no problem. But there we did have good discussions, and people get ideas from other translators as well. So I feel that I need to feel that I'm in Natalia and me as an author, we are in a good hands. And I need to trust the translator. But of course, it feels like, this is Natalia I cannot read, written by me and translated by another person. It feels strange, but I try to think about it as a gift from somewhere.
Yes.
Of course, I feel tremendously happy that this book is translated. It's luxurious.
Yeah, isn't it great? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And in a way, it's maybe sort of liberating in a way when you receive your Hungarian translation of Natalia and you look at it, and every now and again the word Natalia comes up, and then you think it's
I can guess something.
Yeah, it's the right book. Yeah.
And of course, I have written all the languages in Niki de Saint-Phal.
Yes, that's another thing. It's quite interesting. You're going to show the
I'm not sure, but this is the English translation, and there is my handwriting. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, although in fact this is actually Niki de Saint-Phal's original text, the English. Yeah.
Yes, it is, because it's originally written in English. But Niki de Saint-Phal is a French-American artist, and Natalia makes one exercise where she imitates an artistic master of her choice, and it happens to be Niki de Saint-Phal. And this is Niki de Saint-Phal's artwork called My Men, the textual part of it. And Natalia reproduces it by her own hand, and it is, of course, me who has made it in my hand, because I really love to blur the narrational hierarchies. And this is one way to do it in a very concrete manner.
Yes.
And so I do imitate Natalia's handwriting, and Natalia imitates the handwriting of Niki de Saint-Phal, who was a real artist.
Yes.
And when I do it in for example, Lithuanian language or Dutch languages, Romanian, I do not speak at all, understand at all. It comes just like I have described it as calligraphic meditation. Yes. And I need to concentrate very, very much, because otherwise there will be mistakes, of course, because I don't understand it.
And it's something I thought of today when we were planning how to do this talk. Again, all of the languages so far that Natalia has been translated into use the Latin alphabet, but what would happen if you had a Russian translation or an Arabic translation or a Mandarin translation?
Or Japan.
Something that's really far out from our perspective.
Yes, I would love to do it, because it would be so. Yes, it would be like a visual art for me then. But I would need a mentor, good mentor, sitting next to me and giving me a little short lesson on that language. And drawing of these words.
Require a little longer lesson than others. Like
but
Russian, I think Russian, it might be quite straightforward, but then as soon as a language starts going from right to left, that's difficult.
Arabic
would be very difficult. Chinese would be quite difficult. But I mean, what an interesting challenge, actually.
It would be, but it would take time, I know.
Yes, so shout out to Elena, who's in the chat.
That please give me time.
Sort it out, please. Yes. Good. Right. Well, there are still some other questions that we haven't talked about. Let's see. So we've done the. How long did it take to translate the book? I can't remember actually, because I'd already done the sample, which was 50 pages or something, which is about a fifth of the novel or something. Probably 6 months before before Norton picked it up. So it's hard. But I mean, and I was doing it. I remember I was doing it in November 2019 when I was in New York, and I met Gina from Norton for the first time, and I was sort of halfway through it at that point. I can't remember. I mean, a good sort of 3 months probably, and then editing back and forth. Yeah, but I mean, the editors at Norton I thought were really great, and
Yes.
and just made our lives much easier.
The collaboration has been great, I must say.
Yeah,
with Norton.
Very good.
And you.
Well, likewise.
Yeah.
Jen asks again, I find Finnish and English pretty different in how they use sexually charged language. Did you find yourself needing to find maybe more seldomly used words in order to not use language that is too charged for an English-speaking audience? That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought of it. I mean, the one thing, because you use, this book is about Natalia and her sexual proclivities and desires, and there are lots and lots of words for the vagina in this, and Finnish, of course, is quite abundant in that respect. English less so, I think, and I really, really wanted to avoid the C word at absolutely all costs, because it's somehow so violent. But actually, that's why. I mean, it's interesting that you should ask that, Jen, because I did leave the Finnish word vittu untranslated, which I think is maybe the most radical translation decision I made in this book, because it's used. It's used in in sort of. It's pretty frequently in Finnish, isn't it, for just everything, as a sort of standard curse word for everything.
It is, and what is important, that vittu is a very old word, like folklorist word. So
yes,
it's a long tradition behind it. It's very different for that C word in
yes.
English.
Well,
for example,
in its defense is also an old Anglo-Saxon word, but it's just that its meaning and its sort of force today is just terrible, I think.
It is. So it is like vittu is a gate where the shamans go to the underworld, for example. And if a woman shows her vittu to the bear, how do you say bear? The animal, bear. Okay. Not the beer, but bear. Shows it to the bear, then the bear goes away, because the power of vittu is so huge.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, if anybody has the book to hand and they want to consult the etymology of the word vittu, it's on page 206. And it's sort of explained in fairly extensive detail. But I think I'm glad that I left vittu untranslated, because it firstly, it kind of got me out of Dodge, as you would say in the USA. For having to find yet another synonym, but also because then it's useful once you've introduced it to the reader as a concept, then you can use it all the way through, and it actually becomes an interesting kind of punctuating device through the kind of second half of the novel. So there's the section where you use a poem by Riina Katevuori, where she talks about, I can't find the page now, but where there's a kind of alliteration between vittu and valva, and so then you're able to hold on to this alliteration if you have not translated the word, but you've introduced it to the reader much earlier on.
Yes, I found it. It's here in page 2008. In a recent volume, a certain renowned poet wrote the lines, "The vittu is a drafty hallway and the vulva is a violet living room."
Yes, yes. Yeah, so things like that I don't know. Of course, another translator might have done it a different way. There's no correct answer, but I think because one of the things we talked about when we had that meeting at the cafeteria in January 2020 was this idea of even though the book is now in a different language, are we pretending that everything's happening in the UK or in the US, or are we still bearing in mind that these people are still Finnish people
Yes.
who are still speaking to each other in Finnish, and now their words are just in a different language.
Yes.
Which is, and I think because we made the decision that they're still in Finland.
Yes, and it's very necessary that they are, because
I
otherwise, why on earth would they talk about Finnish etymologies at all?
No, of course, yeah, of
so
course.
they would have been needed to remove from the book, and then it wouldn't be my friend Natalia.
Exactly, and then also the entire section with the amusing place names.
Yes,
which is on page 76, is another one where the translator is faced with quite a significant choice, because so you list these place names that have kind of slightly rude, titillating names, but they're real places. That's the thing. And so the scene is Natalia as a young girl finding these names on a map and finding them amusing because they're amusing. But then if you translated them, then that would seem strange that she lives in northeast Finland, and why is she finding place names in English in her? It just wouldn't make any sense.
Yes, I saw a question pumping up.
Oh yes.
That how did I? It was Elina asking, how did I find Natalia?
Okay.
And actually, that is a good one, because in the first place, 2016, I wasn't intent to write at all this book, but then Natalia, who wasn't in person with certain looks, but it was more or less an energy or some very intense questions or something like that, a bit abstract thing, just came, and I call her she now, because it's easier to talk about some abstract thing, an idea called Natalia. She had a story to tell, but she didn't want to tell it straight away. And I didn't know what she is going to tell me. I knew that it is very urgent. And that is why I needed to develop a narrator who would ask questions from her. And I really love these closed places when I write things. Oneiron is also a closed place, because in afterlife you can't go anywhere. You are just there and dead. So Natalia, everything in narrational level happens in this therapy room. But of course, they escape there with the stories. Stories are always a good way to escape the reality and limits of life. But Natalia came, and then I just had to obey her and start to write this novel.
I don't doubt it for a second. Good. I mean, and she's related to Nathalie Sarraute, of course.
Yes, yes. This is my another story. To put it brief, I have done a doctoral thesis on French author Nathalie Sarraute, now almost 18 years. And the process, which has been, of course, also inspiring, but very rough, and has led me to very strange places. The process of this work is put also into my friend Natalia. It reflects it. Of course, the name of Natalia isn't by hazard. It's from the Nathalie Sarraute.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Good. So another couple of questions here. How long have you studied Finnish, and in what context? And how good was your Finnish when you decided, I want to be a translator and my Finnish is good enough to be able to do it well? Well, I began studying Finnish in 1996 when I came to Finland as an exchange student, kind of by accident. I was studying Swedish at University College London, and then I had to do an Erasmus exchange at a Swedish-speaking university. And then my teacher, who was from Stockholm and who'd never visited Finland, said to me, "Oh, well, you should go and study in Turku, in Åbo, because they have a Swedish-speaking university, and you won't need to speak any Finnish because everybody speaks Swedish in Finland." And of course, technically, it's true. Oh, you see Laura's reaction, of course, that everybody speaks Swedish. So of course, everybody technically should speak Swedish because they're all taught it at school, but they don't necessarily want to. And Turku in particular, actually, is kind of like the reception in 1996 of sort of young me wandering around Turku, speaking to everybody with a Stockholm accent, didn't go down particularly well. And but also, I mean, I was 19 and curious, and the Finnish language was sort of crazy and fascinating, and so I decided to start learning. And I met lots of people who were keen to help me. Two of whom are still my really close friends, and one of whom is also a translator. Himself translates Arabic into Finnish, and he's an extraordinary person. But they sort of inspired me to really dedicate myself to Finnish, because it is so fascinating, and it's difficult at the beginning, but then it does get easier. And so that was in '96, and then it was in 2001 when I did an internship at the Finnish Literary Exchange here in Helsinki, with a view to maybe trying to translate little things. So yeah, so I mean, my Finnish was pretty good, I suppose, in 2001. But I mean, it's much better now. But of course, I've been living here now for 20 years. So yeah. And then a question for Laura. Did you think this book would be good for an international audience? Were you writing with an international audience in mind?
Yeah. I think that when you write a book, you can't think very much on audience. So there is other questions than the audience, but I do believe that books are translatable, because I believe in translations. I have in Finnish is so small language in the world, so I have needed the Finnish translations to feed me. So I have to believe in translations very deeply, because they have educated me to be what I am right now. So I think that if I write a book, it is translatable, and it is. But no, I try to keep the idea of the audience away in the process of writing, because it can corrupt things. Yes. It comes beneath the writing process and the text. It can make you want to please somebody. That's not a good point when you write, when you try to be honest in writing.
Yes, I agree. And I mean, sometimes my colleagues who translate Finnish into English, we have our own sort of private communication channels, and we've talked, about why it is that certain books are successful in English and other books aren't, and very often, books that are successful in Finland, and agents, publishers don't really understand why these books aren't then successful in other places or in English. I mean, of course, different people read different things because they read in a different culture, and they have a different, so what is interesting to Finnish readers is not necessarily interesting to other people. And also, I think this idea, I think you're absolutely right, that the minute you start thinking about it, then the book suffers.
Yeah.
Like if you think, how am I going to ingratiate myself to readers in Michigan? It's it's sort of, yeah. I don't really know. I think that's not a way to go. So yeah. Good. What else? So now there's one interesting question from our list. So in the section, so there's a section in the middle of the novel where Natalia writes a letter to the therapist, and she signs off the letter, "Your friend Natalia." Now the therapist takes sort of exception to this and then wonders, well, why is she calling me her friend? But so why is the novel called My Friend Natalia? Because of course that's from the perspective of the therapist. So
Yes, is it?
or is it? Well, that's
yes, that is
yeah.
a very important question. Is
Yeah.
it from the perspective of the therapist? But if it would be, I don't want to give the only answers, because everything is you can debate and interpret. But if you think about that, the label, the name, the title would be kind of framing of the therapist ideas, then it is of course a huge crossing of boundaries, because the therapist needs to keep the distance to their patient, and they are certainly not friend to the patient. But other possible solution or interpretation would be that could it be thought that the reader would be the friend for Natalia?
That's quite interesting. Yeah.
Because Natalia lacks of friends. She says in many places that she doesn't have any friends at all. She has only these obsessional thoughts, and then the therapist.
Yes,
Who
and
is
then all
very,
the
very great.
yeah.
Yes, and formal lovers, and the therapist who
Yes.
gets to be very important to her.
Yeah.
So I would love to think that maybe reader would be the friend for Natalia when they are reading the book, because readership is friendship.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, because you've written about audiobooks as well, and about how they sort of interfere with your interaction with the text. Do you want to expand on that for the listeners?
Yes, it's huge subject. I
It's
think
a
we
huge
are
subject.
almost run out of time, but it is very important that for
Yeah.
me and to understand that the audiobooks, when you listen an audiobook, it is not absolutely not reading. Reading is where you can take your own time, and it's visual, and listening is audible, and it goes. You can't control the process because the sound is just going. It's cognitively and in many respects totally different art form. Hearing the reading, it's part of the performance art. What is esitystaide?
Yeah, performance art. Yeah,
performance art, and reading is reading. So I have wrote an essay which I hope that you will translate. Yes, in
halfway there.
To make it to give more arguments why they should be seen totally separate art forms.
Yeah.
Because at least in Finland, I feel that they are totally mixed. People talk about reading when they have actually heard the book. And
yeah, I mean, they're both ways of consuming a book.
I hate that word, consuming.
But that's what it is, though. But I mean, consume in the way that you eat, not the way that you can spend money, right?
And you just take in. But reading is thinking, and I think that
listening can also be thinking, surely.
It can be. But this is very, very huge subject. Yeah. So I don't know if we need to go very deep in here, but it's totally different.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's something that is sort of becomes flesh in a way at the very beginning of My Friend Natalia, because at the beginning, for the whole of the first chapter, the name Natalia is given in inverted commas because the therapist is giving her this sort of code name. And then the word couch is in italics. And these are things that, of course, in the audiobook, it's very, very difficult to give a sense of what is italics and what is inverted commas. Or in an audiobook, it's difficult to see the illustrations in the book.
Yes, this is the other one, not so explicit maybe, but this is a map, Mississippi map and vulva at the same time. How do you read this into an audiobook?
Yes, and there was one interesting, and one of the bits I listened to on the audiobook today was quite interesting of how the reader had negotiated one of those places. But yeah. So fascinating. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So are there any more questions in the list here? What was the most fascinating moment when translating my friend Natalia? Well, I don't know. I suppose it's like with translating any book. It's when you have a problem, and then you have this eureka moment of like, this is the way it has to be. You've been thinking about it for a week or something, and then you suddenly, it's something, it just all falls from the sky, and then you know what you're doing. A bit like the bit with the place names, which we talked about, that when you suddenly realize, okay, this is the way it's going to make sense to the reader and also be quite funny, then yeah, that's one of the bits I listened to actually today on the audiobook. And it's like you say, they are very different things, the physical book and the audiobook. I mean, and also in a way for me, listening to the audiobook, it's almost like it isn't my translation anymore. Because
there is interpretation between the text
and it's being translated again by the reader. Yeah. So in a way, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could have an audiobook in the editing phase, and then you could find all the things you want to change, because then you're reading with fresh ears. Good. Right. Is there anything else in the question? There's the link to the podcast. Yes. Do you want to say a few words about that podcast? Because I think that was before everybody came online.
About podcast?
Yeah, because I think we talked about it before.
Yeah. That was the first interview I made actually about Natalia in English, and of course from Helsinki. But Jill Roth has what was the name of the podcast?
It was
Chimeric Obscura. Yes, and we did have a talk, and yes.
Yeah, and there you go into much more detail about.
Yes, it was long discussion.
Yeah, so that's, if anyone's interested, then the link is in the chat window. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you for the stimulating talk. It was very interesting to hear, and also hear about the translation process, especially with the we had the Polish editor here as well. So that was really nice to hear how translation works throughout all these different languages. So that was a very interesting point. But I put a link in to purchase the book through bookshop.org, which is a website that helps support independent booksellers in the US. So I would encourage people to buy through there versus another big online retailer. So and I hope to see everyone soon. I know we're getting near the end of this, but so hopefully we can start visiting everyone in person very soon. But thank you again, Laura. Thank you again, David, for this wonderful conversation today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Ciao.
you.
Bye-bye, everyone.